All right, so welcome back to another dress. I am really excited to share this one with you. This one has a nice little story. It was given to me about 15 years or so ago by a good friend who, unfortunately, I haven't seen in a really long time. So if you happen to catch this video, you do know who you are, and let me know more of the story because I have forgotten some of the details. It came to me as a set. I have the dress, the underdress, the little jacket that goes on top, and a man's bathing suit. And I think that the man's bathing suit is the same era as this. I know it looks like it is. So yeah, kind of a cool story, and it's a romantic story because the dress and the suit both belong to a man and a woman who, gosh, I think, I can't remember exactly. I think that they met later in life and still had these clothes from when they were younger, and they were madly in love, and they got married, and they had wonderful lives together, and they kept these two outfits. So when my friend gave them to me, she made me promise that I keep them together because they were together in life, and so these specific two outfits needed to be kept together forever as well. And I love a good romantic story. I'm a sucker for romantic stories. And so, yes, these two outfits have and always will be as preserved as I can possibly make them, and they will always be together. So anyway, that's the little backstory of this specific dress. Another thing about this dress, it is largely machine sewn. I believe the lace, except maybe the little lace trim, but we'll come to that later. The majority of the bobbin lace, the majority of the stitching is all done by machine. It's a relatively simple dress. If you got my last video where I snooped through an Edwardian child's tea dress that had so much more going on than this one did, and even it was a simple tea dress. This one falls a little later than the child's dress did. I believe this one, because it has this, they called it a kimono sleeve, there's no seam along the top of the shoulder. There's no sleeve seam. It's all kind of cut to be one piece. Of course, there is this yoke that would have been a separate piece as well, but it's fashioned to be this flat, straight, single piece type top. This is very indicative of between about 1911 and World War I. So like 1911 to 1913, 14, kind of around there. It is very simple. I think it's really cool because it's a classic dress. Because it doesn't have that kind of frump factor, it's not a cupcake dress. It's very classic and very dignified and relatively simple, but I don't know, more sleek maybe. So that if one were to wear this dress today, you would say, oh, look, she's wearing a beautiful lace dress. It wouldn't look out of place in a more modern setting. All right, so let's see. Let's take a closer look at this lovely little dress. So as I've already said, it's kind of cut into this kimono style. So it doesn't have a lot of seam work. It is pieced because the kind of yoke area has all this tucking. That would have been a separate piece that was then sewn onto the bodice by way of this yoke here. There are only 3 patterns of lace in this entire dress. The majority of the lace is this one here. Let's see, let's find it here in the sleeve. It's all bobbin lace. This has like an after embroidery, or perhaps when it was being made as gimp thread, which is more likely to add a raised kind of embellishment to this lace, and there is a lot of yardage of it. The same weight, the same thread, probably the same maker, also has this little scalloped edging here without a raised embroidered gimp thread as well. This we find along the edge of the sleeves, as well as making up these little rosettes that you'll find down the front of the dress. The third lace, which is to me probably the most exciting of them, is this little edging here. The reason I'm excited about this is because it's very simple. Recreating old lace, either from garments or photographs, is actually one of those weird oddball hobbies that I have. This lace is exciting because it's simple enough that I think I need to add it to my reconstructing lace list to make a video about, because it's very delicate, it's very pretty, and I think it's simple enough that I would feel comfortable giving it to even a beginner bobbin lace maker and feel confident enough that they could pull this off and be able to go fast enough that you can make enough yardage that you can use it in reconstructed Edwardian garments. You could put it on the outer dress itself, you could put it on a chemise, you could put it on corsetry, because we know that this actually is fashionable, or at least acceptable, during this time period. So yes, this pattern, I'll break it down and we'll make a video about that, reconstruct it, because that'll be a lot of fun. All right, so those are the 3 patterns of lace. Like I said, they're all bobbin lace. This bodice is very straight. There's no gathering or ruffling. The only gathering we have on the bodice is here where it meets the waist and the skirt. And even then, it's only slightly gathered here across the front, and it tapers off so that by the time you get to the side seam, there's no gathering at all. So it is gathered a little bit here in the front, and that would give you that kind of fullness in the front that would come down into the waist. But we are looking at a very sleek time. This isn't even quite the very forward pigeon-breasted look of 10 years earlier in the 1900s. This is leaning towards more of the Titanic era, season 1 of Downton Abbey, that kind of right before World War I kind of era, where things were becoming simplified, but not quite as tailored and masculine as World War I brought in. So it's a simple enough bodice. We have some couple rows of tucks here. They go down the whole arm. They're all directional, so starting here at the center, all of these tucks face this way, and then all of these tucks face this way. This row goes up over the shoulder. These go around the arm. Take a quick look here. Okay, so these, here the fabric was tucked before it was sewn into a garment. You can see the inside of the sleeve. This is on top of the tucks. It's not under the tucks like we'll see in another spot. So the tucks were made into the piece of fabric before it was put together as the bodice. The seams look like they're all French seams. You can see where it was sewn here at the top and then flipped inside out and sewn again. So it was all made with French seams. Moving down the dress, we come to the waist. It was lightly gathered across the front. The skirt is not gathered. It's actually cut into wedge-shaped segments here. So it's very flat. It would be very sleek. It would sit very, very straight on the body. The only pieces of hand sewing that I've really been able to find in this dress are where you have 2 of these long sections of lace put together. So here on the waist, up here around the neck, it's one strand of thread that makes a spiral and has just kind of lightly whipped the 2 pieces together. Other than that, everything appears to be machine sewn. All right, so we're going to move down again and take a look at the skirt. This is not the opening, it's just incredibly see-through, so you can see the back of the back opening of the skirt through the front. This gets its A-line shape because of these panels being cut into triangles. The lace running down vertically are the long pieces. These pieces are the short pieces. We have more rosettes and more tucks. The tucks are facing out just like in the bodice. So we have a very sectional front. And then here at the bottom we get our row of lace that attaches the skirt to the bottom ruffle. Interestingly, this skirt has no side seam. It has one seam in the back, but it gets its shape through these panels in the front being cut in a triangle. The ruffle was added last after the skirt. You can see the back seam stops and doesn't go into the ruffle. The ruffle seam is actually here on the side. We can take a look at the side seam for the ruffle here. This is interesting because it's 2 selvages. So it's not a finished edge. It hasn't been felled. It's not a French seam like you find in a lot of other places in this dress. It's just the 2 selvages, which means that this ruffle is the width of the fabric. So you have, I think it was 104 inches wide of this fabric. There's kind of a little mini myth that runs around a lot that says that, oh, fabric was a specific width. Now you can find it often in 45 inches wide or 108 inches wide. And that, oh, back in the day it was all under 30 inches wide, or oh, back in the day it was all such and such. You can find different widths of stuff, and we are more standardized now than we were back in the day. But this is definitely a proof of a very wide piece of this cotton fabric. So the whole entire thing would have been a width of fabric sewn into a tube, and then once it was sewn, either attached before or after, but once it was sewn into its tube, the tucks were sewn in. So that was kind of the order of operations, was it was created into a tube, and then these tucks and the hem were added, because you can see that the tucks go through the seam here. All right, so the ruffle seam is on the side. The ruffle is evenly gathered all the way around. There isn't any extra fullness in the back or anything. We'll turn her over and look and see what we've got. So we have about a 2.5 inch hem. We have our 3 tucks that point down. Here, the seam for the lace insert and the back of the dress is here at center back. But like I said, the seam for the ruffle is on the side. Coming up, it's much more simple. We still have 2 long vertical pieces of lace coming down, but we don't have any of the little cross sections like we do in the front. So the back was very simple. Then we get up here to the buttons. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 buttons up the back. This is kind of interesting because one of the cool things about having such a see-through dress to examine is that you can see through it to the insides of the seams. And normally you wouldn't be able to do that. You would have to take it apart in order to see. So we get kind of like an X-ray version of this dress, which is really super cool. It's 2 separate pieces. This piece goes across, was sewn onto its placket, and the placket was sewn down to the inside. Then the buttonholes were created. All of this is done by machine, and we can see that there's, what would that be? Maybe 1/4 of an inch, maybe 3/8 of an inch of an overturn that's inside of this seam here. Not so on this side. This side's much closer. This side you get a little more room. So that's kind of neat to see because it is like an X-ray vision on this dress. This side with the buttons doesn't have a placket. This one actually is just folded and turned under with the buttons sewn on top. Buttons were sewn on by hand. You can see the very uneven stitching behind the buttons, so it wasn't done by a machine. The buttonholes were also not done by a machine. They were done by hand, and they've been repaired many, many times. So let's see, then that brings us up here. For whatever reason, the waist doesn't have buttons and button loops or buttonholes. It is just a hook right in the middle. It's also a hook up here at the neck. I'm not exactly sure why they've done that. I understand that making buttonholes in lace is difficult, but what I've seen happen a lot is that you'll get like a braided button loop off the edge here that would hold on to that button, but for whatever reason they decided not to do that, and they put a little hook and eye here in with as well. It's possible it was an afterthought, but as you'll see in a minute, the underdress is made the exact same way with the exact same hooks and eyes, and they're the same age, they have the same level of decomposition, so I do believe that they were intentional with the original dress. So for whatever reason they had buttons and then the hook and eye at the waist and the neck. All right, so then we come up. Again, the skirt is not gathered onto the waist. It's very straight, and we have triangular panels that create the A-line. We do have a little bit of gathering here in the back, not as much as in the front, but it is a little bit here. The side seams are not perfectly halfway through the skirt. It was either meant to, fit looser in the front than it is in the back, or the side seams just kind of traveled to the back a little bit. But this measurement from seam to seam here on the sides is shorter than it is in the front. Just like down in the skirt, the buttonhole side was made with a placket, whereas the button side was just turned under and stitched. Coming up, we're missing a button here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 buttons to go up the back. The same insert pattern along the bottom of the yoke as is in the front. Kind of an interesting note. Coming across the arm would have been very straight. Then you have a 45-degree turn. These turns were just sewn in. So it would be straight, corner. Then this is a curve. They've actually just gathered one side of it to make this curve, and then another 45-degree point to come to the back. So that's kind of an interesting detail on how they created this pattern. It looks like it has been sewn the way we sew insert lace on machine now. If you have seen my other tea dress video, that was done in sections, and a lot of the lace was used to bring those sections together. So you can tell by looking at the layering of the stitches that it was 2 pieces of lace like this, and then they put the insert down and they whip stitched it between the 2 sections. This looks like it was done the way we do it now, where you would have 2 pieces, you lay it on, you sew it on. Then in this case, because they're separate, they wouldn't have need to be clipped. If it was a solid piece, you would clip it, fold it back, sew it again, and then trim it as close as you can to the edge of the lace. And that looks like how this was done. You can see the extra row of machine stitching that goes across right about where it was clipped. So it looks like how to do insert lace by machine hasn't changed in 10 years or something since this dress was made. So let's see, that's the insert lace. We have the tucks that carried over from the front, and the same tucks that are carried over to the front. And that brings us up here to the neckline, which also is just attached with one hook and eye. This, as you can see, is a lower neck. It's not like that Victorian high neck with the collar. This one would have sat just on the shoulders over the collarbones. All right, let's look at this neckline here. So you can see this collar is actually, it's not going to let me do it because the fabric's kind of holding itself open. But you can see that this collar is made in a circle. Now, you can take bobbin lace patterns and just kind of stretch the pattern a little bit. You'd rework the pattern a little bit to make the exact same pattern straight as well as in a curve. But I don't think that's what was done here. It looks like, because it's such a slight curve, you would have your longest piece of lace and sew it to your fabric or a guide or something like that. And then you could do it by eye or run a basting thread through the top and ease it in. Not enough to make it pucker and gather, but just enough to make it ease ever so slightly. And then use the bottom of the next layer of lace as its anchor. So this piece here is shorter than this piece, and you would kind of ease it onto it. And then repeat the same process for the very tiny lace at the top. And the tiny lace is an edging, and it's small enough that it wouldn't care really whether it was straight or curved. It's going to lay flat anyway. Each layer is an anchor to the layer below it in keeping that kind of cinched into a curve. Okay, so that's the dress. Interesting to note, there are a couple of repairs. Here on the underarm is probably the most visible one. This is a separate piece of fabric. It's a little more densely woven, so it's definitely not the same piece of fabric, but it's very similar. They sewed it from the inside over this hole here and just kind of sewed around the edge and tacked it into place to keep that from stretching and ripping anymore. There's another one down here at the bottom, on the bottom ruffle, where this was clearly a rip, and they took both sides and just kind of went back and forth with a needle and thread and just pulled it together. It's funny because it's not the most elegant repair, But at the same time, sometimes using big loose stitches actually lets it flow and disappear better than if you were going to do something really severe, which would stiffen it. So it's not bad, and I can see how if this was on the ground, maybe you wouldn't really notice it much at all. So those are the two big repairs that I've seen on the dress. Let's put her away and bring out the jacket. On top of that dress, we have this little jacket. And it's a very simple little jacket. It has a nice full kind of ruffly front. The pattern of the lace is a very simple pattern, and because it's simple, it's made mostly of very familiar grounds in these little circles, and then the flowers are all done with whole stitches on kind of just a twisted background. Because it's so light and it doesn't require a lot of bobbin manipulation, it would be just a very simple pattern. I do think that this is an early machine-made lace. So I don't think that there was actually a lace maker with a pillow sitting down with a million bobbins to make lace that was this wide. I think that this was done on machine. But that certainly doesn't retract from it because it is still that old, and I would love to find an old bobbin lace making machine. I think that would be really fascinating to find one somewhere. Okay, so we can see that the actual pattern of the vest is a simple one. You have just kind of this little rectangle shape with a little bit out at the bottom for under the arms. And then to achieve this like nice kind of flowy, ripply front, it is a piece, I think you can see because the tape helps. So it was cut across the shoulder like this and goes up maybe a little bit and then just kind of comes down into a curve to the underarm. So it's a very simple little pattern, and then when this gets put on, it kind of drapes and falls under the arm. It's not French seamed, it's just kind of cut and sewn. Up here, this isn't a French seam, it's just turned under and machine top stitched down. The front shoulder is gathered onto the back shoulder. And so this is just a nice little kind of vest. It's funny because I don't think the dress needs it. It actually covers up some of the lacework on the original dress, but we do know that layering this lace and these beautiful pieces of lace was a thing. So I don't really have any reason to doubt that this is as old as the dress or that it did originally come or was worn with that dress. And then there's just a piece of silk. You can see it's silk because it's shattering ever so slightly along the edge. A piece of just pink silk ribbon around the entire edge of the lace. So this is a little vest that went with the dress. And then lastly, I really don't want this to come off because it's just disintegrating so bad. But that's one of the reasons why I like doing these videos, is because then we have it on film rather than having to take the dress out again. I can put it back in its nice archival box with its archival tissue paper and all that kind of good archival stuff, and not have to take it out every time I want to check something like, was it French seamed, or how wide were the hems, or something like that. So I think this is a very useful thing to do. For one, it shares the product, like it shares this with more people than I would ever personally get to show it to you. And then also it is logged, so you don't actually have to use the garment itself. That's one of the great things about reproducing things and the recreation of things, is that the originals can stay preserved. All right, so this is the underdress. It's cotton with a silk ribbon. The trim, you'll see this used throughout. And it's just a silk ribbon that was gathered onto a little piece of cord and then hand sewn down. I don't know if you can see that, if the camera's going to pick this up or not, but the seams were all done with a machine, but the trim, you can see the hand sewing. It's got that princess slip line where they go all the way up to the neckline. It's got kind of a wide neck, but the neck actually follows the same curve as the dress does. The armholes they're actually sewn by hand, and there's some loose thread. So we have this little piece of ribbon down here, and we have some loose threads, which makes me think that it was either it had a sleeve originally or another piece of trim or something, and it has been altered since it was originally made. And you come down, let's see. So it's just got these same lines that go all the way down the entire dress. And we get to the bottom here. It's sewn into kind of a band. These are kind of clumsy tucks. Like they're all hand sewn. And they look like they were made to shorten it rather than than as a decoration. We have 2 layers. This is the exact same ribbon trim as along the neckline. This one is not. It's holding up a little bit better, but it's silk as well. So I don't know if this was an afterthought. It's just not quite the same as this one. This one has a little cord that runs through the middle. It's a different shade. This one is not shattering nearly as badly, and it doesn't have that cord run in the middle. It's just gathered and put on. So this seems like an add-on later. This piece of trim is here to cover up where it was sewn on. This ruffle was just folded under and sewn down, and then the trim was added. And then we have more of this same ribbon trim along the bottom. And then the ruffle is just a hair longer than the fabric of the dress itself. They're both hemmed by machine and with a very small stitch. We'll turn it over carefully. We have the same gathering, the same trim, the same piecing going on here. The same vertical lines, giving that princess slip kind of shape to it. So like in the original dress, this is the dress fabric that comes over, and then a placket was sewn on the inside. Here, however, it is a separate piece. And this is the selvage. So they used a piece of selvage as like a twill tape. They just wrapped it around the raw edge to put the hooks on. These are the same hooks and eyes that we saw in the lace dress. They're the same size and the same details on them. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 coming up to the top. This underdress actually has a lot more repairs done on it than the lace dress is. Here's a little piece that was just darned in. So there's no extra fabric. It was just a needle and thread. And you sew up and up and up and over and over and over. And then you have a reinforcement for this little spot that was coming apart, like over here. This part, kind of the same area, was apparently a little worse because they didn't just darn it. They actually put a piece of fabric on the back. Same color. What's interesting is that it is the same fabric, and I don't know where they got it from unless there's a piece missing inside the ruffle or something. But yeah, it looks like it's the same fabric that they used. And then the trim would have gone all the way along the neckline. The underdress is a little more clumsy than the lace dress itself, but it wasn't meant to be seen as closely as that either. The dress would have been the better garment of the two. This was more of just a lining. So it's perfectly reasonable that this would have been kind of thrown together a little more than the lace dress, which would have had more effort put into it. Okay, so that's the dress. Now, if you're curious, I have the true love of my lace dress, this man's bathing suit. Going off of what was told to me when I was given this outfit, this is an original, same time period, 1910s man's bathing suit. You have the legs. You have a panel. They're sewn here at the kind of waist hip area, and then comes up to the very long sleeves and the V-neck. Now, what threw me off originally was, yes, this is an overlock stitch. And I was like, well, it couldn't possibly be as old as that because it's got an overlock stitch. But the first overlock was invented in the 1880s. And so that's 30 years before I would imagine that this would have been made. So, yeah. So I'm not exactly sure. I'll have to get back. I don't think it was a costume. I think it's an original. And yeah, I'll have to get a hold of my friend and get the details of these two pieces because that story needs to be written down and archived with the garments, absolutely. And I know I wrote it down at the time, I just have no idea where it is. That was a long time ago. I've had 3 kids since then. We've moved like 4 times since then. I don't know where it is. But the garments are safe, and the garments are still together, and that's the main thing. So yeah, anyway, so here is the bathing suit that goes with the lace dress. Alright, so that does it for this installment of snooping through old clothes. I hope you enjoyed it. One of the things I really, really like about this dress is how classic the style is, the cut, how it wouldn't necessarily be out of place if you were to wear a reconstruction of it today. You wouldn't stand out as being, oh, look at that, she's in a costume. I did enjoy going through and seeing the all the machine stitching on it. At first, you would think that the hand sewing is so much cooler to see, and in a way it is, because someone's hands actually went through every stitch. But this would have been done at a time where they were treadle or hand crank sewing machines, and just because a seamstress is sitting in front of a very, very old machine rather than with a needle and thread in her hands or his hands, I don't think that takes it away from the dress at all. I mean, we're talking about really early machines. Treadle sewing machines, the hand crank sewing machines, only the earliest of the electric sewing machines. And can you imagine these early bobbin lace machines, how mechanical and precise they would have to be in order to make 18-inch wide bobbin lace? I mean, in so many ways, it would just be easier to make it by hand. I hope there are some early bobbin lace machines still around in some museum somewhere, because, I would just really love to see when old machines are so amazingly cool. It's fascinating to be able to see these stories that these dresses tell and these old clothes tell about how they were made, when they were made, why they were cut the way they were, all the different repairs on it. It was very neat to see. I don't think that the child's dress had any repairs on it, but this one did, which meant that it was worn a lot more. And that itself is wonderful because it means that it was loved and appreciated. It's an honor to be able to still be able to see it and look through it and enjoy it today. So anyway, thank you for coming on this little journey through this dress with me, and I'll see you next time. Bye! So we have the segments. Oh, hi baby. What? Alright, so we're going to move down again. Going for a walk with Daddy? Hey. You have your coat on. Yeah, you nice and warm? Nice and warm. Hey. Your shoes.